From the headquarters of Talasio English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South. Now I'm Saini Gray. The United Nations General Assembly is debating a resolution to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. Speaker after speaker spoke out against the economic, financial and commercial blockade, which has lasted for almost 60 years. A series of regional organizations, including CELAC, CARICOM and ASEAN, also condemned the blockade. They described it as illegal and affecting millions of people. In an exclusive interview with Talasio, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez spoke to our correspondent in New York, Jorge Gestoso.
Well, we saw the greater part of the debate, the discussion of the resolution. The most important thing is the need to put an end to the financial, commercial and economic blockade against Cuba. So what happened today was the discussion of this document, this resolution, the contributions from the delegations. Well, this will finish tomorrow morning. The most important thing is 31 delegations spoke. There wasn't one single delegation that supported the blockade. There wasn't one single who raised questions about human rights in Cuba. There was not one single one that referred to the targets for sustainable development, accusing Cuba. So it was an absolutely overwhelming support for the elimination of the blockade, unanimous support against the blockade, and explicit opposition in some tacit, in other cases, to the manipulative amendments presented by the U.S. government to try and water down the resolution, and which the General Assembly has already approved 26 times. Upon these amendments, what kind of pressure is being exercised by the U.S. to incorporate these into the document? It was clear in the General Assembly to see U.S. officials trying to exert pressure directly, sometimes almost public pressure, not only against representatives of member states, but also about officials of the General Secretary of the United Nations itself. It's been clear and public, and we should condemn before the world that the U.S. State Department has tried not only to water down and distort the resolution, not only to sabotage the process of decision-making about it, but is also exerting strong pressure to force some countries to support their amendments, with the illusion that this would be a pretext to strengthen the blockade against Cuba, which is their current policy, or to present the artificial illusion that there is international support for criticizing Cuba on human rights. There were outrageous, unacceptable pressure being exerted. You say there's an increase in hostility by the Trump administration against Cuba. Is this part of a new stage in relations between the United States and Latin America? It's difficult to say, but it's clear that the policy applied by the North American government at the moment is not a new policy. It's the old policy applied by a dozen presidents beforehand, based on the Cold War, an obsolete Cold War. It's obsolete, criminal, this policy. That's the exact, in terms of the Geneva Conventions on genocide. It's a hostile, aggressive policy of economic war against the Cuban people, which has produced total isolation for the United States on this policy. This isolation is growing, and it makes a huge obstacle to the United States' relationship with Latin America. It's a big mistake for them And I think this regional consensus against the blockade.
Among those who spoke at the General Assembly were the representatives of Venezuela, El Salvador and Jamaica. They expressed their disappointment over the attempts by the United States to intensify the blockade.
That the time has come to take concerted action to build international mechanisms which would make it possible to counter the effects of the illegal coercive measures against hundreds of millions of people who are innocent victims throughout the world. It is time now to organize and to free our people from this weapon of international aggression which has afflicted humankind. The report of the Secretary General confirms the cost of this policy for the country, which causes substantial and unjustifiable damage to the well-being of the Cuban people, and is contrary to the desire for peace of the Latin American and Caribbean peoples enshrined in the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. We also regret the new policy announced by the current administration of the United States, which seeks to strengthen the economic, commercial, and financial blockade against Cuba, and is a setback in the process of normalizing bilateral relations between the two countries. The economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed on Cuba is contrary to the letter, spirit, principles, and purposes of the United Nations Charter and international law. The CELAC reiterates its strong rejection of the application of laws and measures contrary to international.
The embargo hinders Cuba's national plan for economic and social development. This confirms, therefore, that the embargo represents a transgression of the right to peace, development, and security of a sovereign state. Madam President, Jamaica has always maintained that engagement with Cuba remains essential. We have had a long and fruitful relationship with Cuba, one of our closest neighbors, which has witnessed the development of a vibrant and dynamic cooperation framework, despite the challenges wrought by this embargo.
Switching gears now, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that the number of military troops that will be deployed to the Mexican border could be as high as 15,000. Operations will be focused in the states of Texas, Arizona, and California. Over 5,000 troops are expected to be deployed by the end of the week. Around 2,000 soldiers are already stationed at the border.
As far as the caravan is concerned, our military is out. We have about 5,008. We'll go up to anywhere between 10 and 15,000 military personnel on top of Border Patrol, ICE, and everybody else at the border. Nobody's coming in. We're not allowing people to come in. If you look at what happened in Mexico 2 days ago, with the roughness of these people in the second caravan that's been forming, and also, frankly, in the first caravan, and now they have one forming in El Salvador, and we are thinking very seriously, immediately stopping aid to those countries, because, frankly, they're doing nothing for the American people.
Despite these threats, a new migrant caravan has left El Salvador as citizens continue to flee their countries for what they hope is a better future. This new group is reportedly made up of around 2,000 people. Many walked with Salvadorian flags as motorists honked in support. This is the fourth caravan so far to leave Central America for the United States as the mass exodus continues. Our correspondent in San Salvador, Ernesto Alvaros, brings us more.
A new caravan of Salvadorian migrants has set out towards the United States. They hope to reach the Guatemalan border by Wednesday afternoon. Despite warnings by authorities about the dangers of the journey, they have pressed ahead. These people are set on making it to the United States. They hope to join the first caravan that left San Salvador on Sunday and has already reached Tree.
The first migrant caravan has already traveled over 1,000 kilometers. On Tuesday, they arrived to the town of Juchitán in Oaxaca state.
There are over 5,000 Central Americans that remain firm on their decision to reach the northern border in Mexico. One of them is Carolina Garcia, who turned 22 on her way to the north. She received a message from her mother, who stayed in Honduras.
There are no jobs in Honduras and the prices are high. Now the president passed a bill that said that from the age of 30 they are not going to work. That is why there is a lot of crime.
Finding a place to sleep is a hard task. It's not easy to be the first one to arrive when you have 2 small children, but nothing is affecting this family's spirit to move forward.
The truth is that it has been rough, a lot of fatigue, but we have the goal to reach our final destination. Sometimes I have to say to my children, let's go, sometimes pulling them and sometimes walking.
Mexican people continue to show kindness, even here in Juchitán, where the community is still recovering from the destruction caused by an earthquake.
We have prepared this place so they can be here and giving them food, a roof, and health safety too.
The Oaxaca Ombudsman's office helps migrants with access to telephone lines to call their homes. In an assembly, migrants have decided to stay united. They also named the representative committee to talk with the state government and ask for buses that allow them to reach the capital city.
And the second caravan that left from Honduras is already in Mexico. Our correspondent Pablo Perez is with them in Chiapas.
It's been only 2 days since they first set foot on Mexican soil, and they are showing the signs of exhaustion because after the difficult river crossing on the border, they have only walked 30 miles so far. There's only around 18 miles to go to the first stop today in Huixtla, still in the state of Chiapas, and they have high hopes, really high hopes of reaching the first group of the migrant caravan, but they are 250 miles away still. So it's difficult because physically they're running on fumes, and they still have long stretches of road without any possibility of getting help from the villagers around, because there's still even one stretch that has about 60 or 70 miles without any population at all, which is the way they get their water and food. So they have to wait, and they have to deliberate what is the best choice to take in order to reach the first caravan.
We'll take a short break now and have more news after this. Welcome back. A court in Peru has ordered the detention of the opposition leader, Keiko Fujimori. Judge Richard Concepcion convicted Fujimori to 36 months of a preventative detention. The ruling came after the judge analyzed a request by the public ministry. Fujimori is under investigation for alleged money laundering during her presidential campaign. Brazil's President-elect Jair Bolsonaro has chosen Chile as the first country that he will visit. Chilean citizens received the news with mixed feelings. The opposition and some right-wing parties have criticized the attitude of the government towards the meeting. President Sebastián Pinera confirmed that he's spoken to Bolsonaro over the phone and they've agreed to meet. The Latin American Court of Water has made a number of state agencies responsible for damages in the Hidroituango project. The court has also called for the immediate dismantling of the hydroelectric project. They've also pointed out that many environmental, economic, social and cultural damage has been caused due to the mega project. The governor of Antioquia responded by saying that they respect the court's decision, but that they have no legal influence in the project. Indigenous people in the Colombian Amazon have urged the government to consider the fundamental issues of their communities.
In the government's National Development Plan, the people of the Amazon want the government of Iván Duque to ask them about 36 safeguard plans.
Out of over 1,500 agreements, only 6% have been fulfilled. when it comes to territory. We can say the government does not want the indigenous people to occupy even 1 millimeter.
The constant threat of being displaced while the government continues its extractivist policies is making indigenous communities lose confidence.
The National Commission for Human Rights of Indigenous Peoples of Colombia has in its database over 900 oil projects that are underway in various departments of the country.
The combination of multinationals, government indifference, and aggression by armed groups is making the situation of indigenous people even worse.
Records show more than 33,000 indigenous victims in all departments of the Colombian Amazon. At least 66% of the victims are women, children, and young people.
So they ask to be included in the implementation of the peace agreement.
They are ignoring takeovers from various multinationals that led to thousands being displaced. This wasn't taken into account in the peace process.
Communities are pleading with the government to remove a bill that will allow for more extractivist practices and reduce their rights further.
The Islamic movement of Nigeria, who have clashed with security forces, claim that 42 of their members have been killed. Security forces opened fire on them after they were protesting for the release of their jail leader, Ibrahim Zazaki, who is facing murder charges because of a violent brawl between his supporters and security forces in 2015. The U.S. State Department has confirmed an American missionary has been killed in crossfire between the military and separatists in Cameroon. Charles Westco was shot in an area where the military continues to fight English-speaking separatists, wanting to break away from the predominantly Francophone country and create an independent state called Ambazonia. The leader of the main rebel group in South Sudan, Riek Machar, has arrived at the capital of Juba for a peace deal. Machar was received by the Sudanese President Salvador at the airport. He participated in a ceremony to celebrate the peace agreement with the government. Since the peace agreement broke down in 2015, Machar has been living in exile. Okay, so World News is next, so stay with us. Welcome back. A suicide bomber has killed 7 people in Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul. The attacker targeted a bus carrying employees of a prison as it was entering the facility. 5 others were wounded in the blast.
This morning, around 7:25 a.m., a suicide attacker was trying to enter the Puli Charki prison, which has been identified by the Afghan police. The attacker blew himself up outside the prison, killing 6 and wounding 7.
In a landmark ruling, Pakistan's Supreme Court has acquitted a woman who has been on death row for 8 years under blasphemy charges. Aisha Bibi won her appeal against the conviction and her death sentence was overturned. Back in 2010, she was found guilty of taking the Prophet Muhammad's name in vain while arguing with neighbors. Following the judgment, security has been beefed up as angry protesters erupted by the Islamist Jamaat-e-Islami party. They strongly oppose her acquittal and have issued death threats. Russia has warned of a false flag chemical attack being planned in Syria's Idlib province. Speaking at a press briefing, the Defense Ministry's chief spokesperson Igor Konashenkov said they have intelligence about the attack.
The Russian Center for Reconciliation of Opposing Sides in Syria has information that on October 27, the terrorists of the Islamic Party of Turkestan transferred 20 containers with 10 liters of chlorine each from Marat and Noman. They were uploaded in the settlements of Kafr Nabil and Al-Hawash.
Still in Russia, 1 person has died and 3 others injured in an explosion at the Federal Security Service headquarters. Russia's investigative committee said a 17-year-old teenager blew himself up in the lobby of the office, detonating a homemade bomb. The committee said the teenager was a resident of the city where the headquarters are based. The cause of the attack are being investigated. And now let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines around the world.
The Austrian government said it won't sign a migration pact by the United Nations set to be adopted in December in order to defend its national sovereignty. The UN's Global Compact for Migration wants to improve international cooperation in order to tackle the growing number of migrants by laying out 23 objectives to open up legal migration. The United States and Hungary have already rejected the accord. Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney has said it's possible to reach a deal on Brexit by November 21st. He said that British negotiators will likely confirm the possibility of a deal early next week. Britain is due to leave the European Union by March 2019, but UK Brexit Minister Dominic Raab said there are 4 points yet to be sorted out, such as temporary joint UK-EU customs territories or the UK's continued access to Northern Irish businesses.
But of course, there will not be a new leaders' summit on Brexit if there's not a signal from the negotiating teams that there is something for EU leaders to sign off on. And so I think it is up to the negotiating teams, but the British side in particular, if they want to conclude the text of a withdrawal treaty in November, then the negotiations need to intensify.
After a 9.5-year mission, we say goodbye to the Kepler Space Telescope. NASA says the system has run out of fuel and now is destined to drift around the Sun for eternity. Since its launch in 2009, Kepler has discovered more than 2,600 planets outside our solar system. It is now replaced by another satellite called TESS.
So we're going to go back to our top story. For the entire day, TELUSU has been covering the special UN General Assembly debate on ending the blockade against Cuba. And now we're going to go to our correspondent in New York, Jorge Gestoso, to discuss the UN General Assembly debate on Cuba. Jorge, thank you so much for joining us. Could you give our viewers a bit of a roundup of how today's debates went?
Well, first of all, an excuse because I have to use my phone. I haven't traveled with my return. Most important thing is I was having the opportunity to interview this afternoon the foreign minister of Cuba. We're talking about Bruno Rodriguez. Excuse me. And he's extremely optimistic in the passage of the resolution once again. This is going to be the 27th year on a row that Cuba is presenting a resolution against the blockage of the United States has imposed on Cuba, that the resolution is going to pass as they wish because they presented a resolution, even though the U.S., according to Mr. Bruno Rodriguez, the U.S. is tampering against that resolution, trying to introduce 8 amendments in order to precisely tamper, delay, and use what he calls different tactics in order to try to get more countries, trying to, in a way, trying to be in the same side of the United States. You have to remember that last year, out of the 193 countries that are here in the United Nations, 191 were voting against the sanctions of the U.S. against the blockade. Only the U.S. and Israel voted in favor. So Mr. Bruno Rodriguez is saying that 3 things are going on. There's an overwhelming support of Cuba. He says that is very clear, a lot of pressure from the U.S. to trying to influence other countries to approve those amendments. And third, he was announcing some procedural irregularities, according to him, that the U.S. was practicing throughout this first day of sessions. For example, trying to interrupt the participation of other countries in order to emphasize what was going to be their position, what was going to be those amendments in order to try to get them in their side. Anyway, he's optimistic. Tomorrow by 10 a.m. in the morning is going to be a vote, and we are going. Of course, we're going to report on that. But according to Mr. Rodriguez, against the foreign minister of Cuba, he's extremely optimistic that the resolution is going to pass once more, and it's going to pass most probably without including those amendments.
Thank you so much for your update, Jorge Gestoso. We always appreciate chatting with you. And we've come to the end of this news brief. So for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you for watching.